Hello, Newburgh. It's Pastor Steve here with our Monday Minute for October the 11th of 2021. We have a few things that we want you to know before we get to today's devotion. The first is that our Lectio Divina class continues either in person here at the church or online on Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Our Trunk or Treat is going to be coming up at the end of this month on Sunday, October 31st, Halloween. You can sign up for that by contacting Reverend Gassaway or information that you can find there on the webpage so we can have a great, safe Halloween for our community here. That Sunday morning, we will also be celebrating All Saints Sunday, so we hope that you will join us for that, as that is always a great celebration and a time of remembrance for our saints who have gone on to glory here in the last year. Check out all of our activities that are happening here at Newburgh by going to our webpage at newburghumc.org/events. And if you have any other questions, you can always contact us here at the church office. This past week, I've been doing a lot of reflections, particularly around Romans 12. Now, if you're not familiar with the book of Romans, it comes right after the book of Acts in the Bible, and while it's not the first of the Apostle Paul's letters, it is his most developed work which he wrote to the church at Rome. This is a place and a people that Paul had not yet visited, and he wouldn't get to do so until later in his ministry. But Romans 12 is often cited because, as many biblical scholars have said, this chapter gives us the basics of living as a Christian and what Christian community is all about. The key phrase for me actually comes in verse 2, and it says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you might discern what the will of God is, what is good, acceptable, and perfect." For the last several years, I had been starting my mornings off watching the news. I wanted to be up on the latest. I wanted to be able to start my day knowing everything that I needed to know. But it wasn't always that way for me. See, I used to start my mornings watching ESPN. Yes, I got my day started off with sports. And then I would get about my day and get the news throughout the rest of it. But I got away from that, which was fine for a while. But recently, like many people throughout the pandemic, I started to notice something. An uneasiness, an anxiousness that getting the news would just exacerbate rather than alleviate. We were anxious about our own health and our own safety, but also a bitterness and even a resentment that's created the political divides which have only seemed to deepen and become more extreme in the last couple of years. My devotions, my studies as I prepare to preach each week, they weren't alleviating that tension. Many of us have described feeling the same way. It's not uncommon, especially when our life has been disrupted in the way that it has. But then it finally hit me. See, these news shows are not really trying to tell me what's going on in the world. Sure, they're related to that, but what they are trying to do above everything else is to keep me captivated, to keep me watching, to keep me hooked on that next story, to get us all riled up so that I would simply continue to tune in. In short, it becomes negative, and you start your day then in a negative way, and it shapes the way that we think. The way news gets delivered today is really an attempt to get people to conform to the powers of this world. But Paul reminds us, and reminds the whole church for that matter, that as followers of Jesus, we are to be transformed, and specifically transformed into the will of God. We do so by the renewing of our minds so we might discern what is the will of God for us. And that's what we do when we gather for worship and when we gather for study. Paul goes on then in his letter to the Romans in chapter 12 to remind us that we should not think of ourselves more highly than we ought to, but to think with sober judgment according to the measure of our faith. He reminds us that we all have different gifts, each with their important part to play within the body of Christ, and we are to complement one another for that diversity, not tear one another down because of it. In verse 9 and 10, he then gets to the overall point. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection and outdo one another in showing honor. A lot of that seems to be lacking today. But we as Christians have a duty to not be conformed to this world, but to be transformed. And it starts with the renewing of our minds. So I've turned off the news and went back to catching up on my sports and what happened the day or even the days beforehand. The news is still there, but I've found that starting my day reflecting on something that I love and enjoy, it's a huge boost to be able to share that love throughout the rest of the day, rather than conforming to the powers and negativity of this world. It frees me up in my devotion time not to lament about what's going wrong, but to reflect and to be inspired about what we can do that is good. The world needs the church to be the church, especially now. And it needs us to lead in doing good and showing love. So whatever your morning routine is, I would encourage you to focus on love. Let's not be conformed to the powers of this world and allow ourselves the freedom to have our minds transformed into the will of God. Whether it's watching your morning sports shows or doing an early morning devotion, or even sitting quietly with a cup of coffee or tea, I actually do all three. But whatever it is, focus our hearts and focus our minds on doing the will of God. And if we do that, we can be transformed, and we will see love grow. The biggest place we can see it is starting in you. That's what I'm doing, and I hope that you will also try to do the same. I'll be away for the next couple of weeks, actually taking some time to celebrate with my wife as we take a delayed anniversary trip, and that's also going to be a time for us to renew and connect. So I'll be back here in a few weeks, but until then, stay safe, outdo one another in honor, do good, and love one another. And we'll be back here once again for another edition of the Monday Minute.